Now, I've never been world class at the deadlift, but I did get very competitive in my sport, and I did so after many years of not only sucking at the deadlift, but outright hating it. So if you're having trouble making your deadlift training make sense, if your technique's inconsistent, if you're having trouble maintaining form, I'm here to help you with 8 of the most common form errors that people make in the deadlift. Now, this isn't going to be a cookie cutter deadlift form error video that presupposes that there's like a correct way to be deadlifting. And if you're not doing that, then you're automatically doing something wrong. I'm not going to obsess over the middle of the foot. I'm not going to obsess over exactly where your feet should be or the angle of your back. I know that there is a lot of different builds out there, and each build can potentially accommodate a few different setups. If you look at the best deadlifters in the world, even equating for conventional, many of them will deadlift with wider feet, narrower feet, some with a wider grip. Some people will be more upright, some will have their hips further back, some will be pitched a little bit more forward. But there are some universal rules that you all can benefit from getting down, and I am going to go over those today. Thank you to the 122,000 future world champions who subscribe to this channel, and to the 60% watching right now who haven't subscribed yet. If you found any of this helpful or entertaining, please consider subscribing. I put out 4 to 5 videos a week, and you want to make sure you don't miss a thing. So thing number 1 is overarching. Now, this is something I was guilty of when I was getting back injuries. I thought the trick to a really solid deadlift was having not just a flat back, but a really arched back. Now, a lot of this was misinterpretation of equipped lifting that was really big at the time, where a lot of people were being told to arch really, really hard into their squats. And my brain took that and thought that that was appropriate for all spinal loading, that if I was deadlifting, if I was squatting, if I was doing anything in strongman, that I should have my back arch as much as possible. And you hear cues like chest up when people are trying to lead with their chest, people are trying to crank their head back to get into position, or when people are really, really worried about rounding forward. If they're having the shoulders dump or they're rounding forward and they can't prevent that when the weight gets heavy, they think logically, I should just overarch to correct. Now, this creates a problem because it destabilizes the midsection by pointing the ribs away from the pelvis. It puts you into an anterior pelvic tilt, which is not strong. So not only is your midsection not in a really good position to brace, but it lengthens your hamstrings and puts you in a really weak starting position. So for years, while I was trying to get that down, I never felt strong off the ground. I always felt inconsistent in my pull. And it wasn't until I learned how to brace, learned how to get my ribs down, keep my hips neutral, don't bust the biscuits. That's the analogy that works pretty well. If you think of a can of soda, your ribs, your diaphragm should be on top of your pelvic floor, and that's how you create that stability and you get that circumferential pressure. It's when they point away from each other, when you get that big arch, stretches out your abdominals. I mean, really stretch out your abdominals, and then imagine getting kicked in the stomach. How much force, how much tension are you really getting in your abs right there? So that's what you want to think about. Now, there's a lot of controversy over what posture should look like in the deadlift. I'm actually here to tell you I would prefer somebody have a slight forward round that persists in every deadlift they do than have an overly arched back. A little bit of round forward is acceptable. You can get strong, you can learn to brace in that position. But when you are completely arched, you are taking away every leverage advantage. You are taking away every bit of efficiency, and you're not necessarily making your lower back safer. I would strongly argue you're actually making it worse. Form error number 2 is not having any real cue that builds stability in the midsection or the upper back. So this kind of ties into the overarching point. When you're not actually cueing to brace, or you're so spread out that you don't know how to build tension with your abdominal stretch like that, you are not going to be as efficient. You're not going to be able to transfer force. Now, I specifically used bracing as a way to eliminate all of the low back injuries that I was having for the better part of 10 years that completely sidelined all my deadlift progress. And it was recurring, it was chronic. I was having injuries, tweaks every few months. I tweaked my back. It wasn't until I figured out how to get my ribs down, how to brace, how to keep tension going into the pull that I was actually able to not only transfer force way more efficiently, but eliminate all my issues. Now, is that going to be the case for everybody? No. But no matter what lift you're talking about, if you're talking about transferring force, any sport, any strength contest, any feat of strength or power, any physical demonstration, you need efficiency. If your midsection is like a soggy shoe, you're not going to transfer force efficiently. That means your pull is going to be worse than it could be. Every time, 100%. I personally think that having a rigid midsection regardless of your form. Again, even if the back is giving a little bit, if you can maintain that through the entire pull, a more rigid midsection is going to be safer and it's going to transfer force more efficiently, period. Now, the upper back does tie into that. Now, again, tied into the last point, people are inclined to think that their upper back should be retracted, that their scapula should be retracted, like a geared powerlifter doing a really heavy bench, getting the shoulder blades way, way back and pinched together. And that's not correct. There are no really good deadlifters that do that, because that puts you automatically at a several inch deficit because it pulls your arms up and back. So you want to build that tension in your back. You want the stiffness and the stability of a strong, rigid upper back. But the fact is, your arms, they're going to have to hang. So you have to get comfortable with your arms hanging down. The cue should be packing your shoulder blades down into your pockets. So one way to do that, you can think about bringing your shoulder blades down. I like to think about my lats as if I'm physically trying to pull the bar back into my shins. If you ever do Romanian deadlifts, you know that the bar tends to drift away from you. So that's a really good opportunity to cue that, to bring the bar back. So if you're doing that movement, trying to keep the bar behind your shoulders a little bit with your arms, you're going to be getting that tension, and you can kind of pair those together. So doing some good bracing exercises. I like 90-90 breathing. I like any of the McGill 3 stuff. I like planks. I like rollouts. Anything where you are having to brace to keep a neutral spine under a load for time is going to help you do that for a deadlift. And if you get to the point where one of your cues right before you pull is put it in your stomach, squeeze like you're going to get soccer kicked right in the ribs right before you pull, a radiation takes over, and you're actually going to find that you're stiffer and more stable and stronger throughout the rest of your limbs. As far as keeping the bar back, there is aside from Romanian deadlifts, there's a trick you can use where you have a buddy tie a mini band, or you can attach it like a kettlebell or something to the barbell, so it's pulling the barbell away from you. You don't need a lot of resistance, just enough for that bar to drift out, and you have to focus on pulling it back. And if you start your pulls like that, you're going to transfer force so much more aggressively. It's going to be stupid, and it's going to go a long way to keeping you safe over time. You can never have a midsection that is too strong. It just doesn't exist. Okay, thing number 3 is the bar drifting out. You're going to notice that all of these things overlap. We just talked about cueing upper back tightness, and part of that is keeping the bar back, but the bar drifting by itself is a form error. There's some people that don't have the drift problem, and they're not getting a lot of tightness in their upper back. Specifically, if you go to pull and that bar goes out in front, that's a problem. That's something you want to work on. So if pulls feel really, really gross, especially off the ground, or if you feel like you get stuck right in the middle, make sure you're filming yourself. Make sure you can track exactly where that bar is, because so many deadlift problems, including postural problems, I had this problem for a long time, can be traced to the bar just simply drifting out in front. So that mini band trick that I just told you, one of the best ways that you can cue it. One of the things that I like doing too, when I was doing a powerlifting style deadlift, when I was going mixed grip, is I like to start with my arms up, take my breath, and I feel my lats tighten up as I bring the arms down. And by packing everything down, it kind of cued that motion. So once I hooked my underhand, got my overhand in, I was already kind of primed to shove the bar back into my shins. Now, you don't have to peel the skin off your shins like a cheese grater, but you do want to be cognizant of that backwards force that pulls the bar back into you, that keeps it from drifting away. Because if you're pulling aggressively, if your hips are doing all kinds of wacky shit, and as you get into that position where the bar breaks off the ground, if you just get dumped over and the bar gets out in front of you, you killed your leverages. Every problem you have in the deadlift is going to be made worse, and it's going to be much harder to keep everything in check. So that's definitely something you want to look at. There's no deadlift style that favors the bar being out in front, so keep that in mind. Guys, if I can help fund this channel and help you solve a problem, I call that a win-win. So please allow me one moment to preach the good word of Boost Camp. I tend to get a little complex when I'm writing workout plans. Tracking progress for these programs is hugely important, but options were never great. I would write these long, complex progressions by hand into a notebook, or I would carry a binder filled with spreadsheets I printed off of LiftVault. That's why I'm here to introduce you to Boost Camp. Boost Camp is the easy way to track training progress directly from your phone. Their library of programs features countless dozens of powerlifting and hypertrophy specific programs from your favorite creators, including Jeffrey Verity Schofield, Johnny Candido, Eric Helms, Greg Knuckles, Alberto Nunez, and of course, yours truly. Boostcamp also has exclusive programs that you just won't find anywhere else. Select the one best suited to your needs and watch the sets, reps, weights, and exercises populate automatically. Don't guess at that one weight you lifted that one time for how many reps again? Have your log of training with you at all times for easy reference in the convenience of your phone. Not only does Boostcamp have a stellar product, but their support is the only reason this channel exists. So thank you, the viewer, and thank you to Boostcamp. Check it out today. The link is in the description. Number 4, your weight gets shifted forward at the start. Again, this goes back to the last one. Now you can also do a good job of keeping the bar back against your shins and still be kind of forward on your toes, still feel like everything gets pulled forward. Now there are a couple things that can contribute to this. A limp start is probably one of the most common things. If you do feel like you're getting pitched forward, you're getting way over the bar. If you're just being really soggy, if you're not doing the bracing, if you're not really cueing your upper back, if you're not aware of your position being balanced at the start, it's really easy to just jerk into the bar and then the stronger muscles take over and you just end up kind of ratcheting over into this really weak, inefficient position. It could potentially be that, say, your quads are weak, so your knees extend, just like a squat morning. Your knees are extending, the quads are contracting, but no movement's happening because they're too weak to carry the system. So then everything gets shifted forward into like a stiff leg pull and your stronger posterior takes over. So there's a couple ways you could look at that. You could think, okay, maybe my leg drive needs to get better. So you think about direct quad work, like really heavy leg presses. You're thinking about maybe pause squats, hip belt squats, trap bar deadlifts have been used for that. Or maybe you actually need to start with your hips at the position where everything breaks. That could be because your posterior is just way, way stronger. And maybe it makes sense to play into that depending on the person. It also could be your leverages won't accommodate the type of deadlift you're trying to pull off. So if you're really leggy, you have a really short torso, you're going to be like a human crane. So you need to position yourself in a way where you're balanced and you're not trying to like squat in or get into some awkward position, get a bunch of leg drive, and then you just end up tipped forward and that momentum really throws you off. So I recommend people kind of start at the position that the bar breaks from as kind of a default recommendation. There aren't a ton of scenarios where I would tell people to go against that. But as a general rule, if you do feel like you're getting tipped forward, practice shifting everything back a little bit. Doesn't mean you have to squat way down, but it does mean get your weight shifted back a little bit. Try to distribute the load a little bit more evenly. Feel yourself load into your hips. I pulled like this with a lot of success. I got a real long torso. So if everything dumps forward on me, I ended up out in front in a really aggressive way that was not good. And I found that I could actually shift my weight just back and get a little more vertical. It made it a little easier to brace, but there was a trick. You have to kind of balance in that position because it's really easy to fall back. It's really easy to get out of the pocket and be in a really weak position. But sinking my hips back and loading into my hips almost like a leg press was a game changer for me. And I got really comfortable pulling in that style. There's some strongman. Jerry Pritchett's a good example, pulls in that style. It looks like he's doing a kind of wider stance, a hip sled type movement. And that's a good way to kind of center the force back more so you don't end up getting rolled forward when you go into those really big aggressive deadlifts. Now, number 5 is the counter to getting too far forward. This is sitting too far back, getting too far down, because we're always trying to find the sweet spot. You can always take good advice to an extreme. And even if getting your weight shifted back a little bit helps, there's people that do it way too much. Now, this one, there's a caveat because there are some advanced lifters you will see sit way down and then almost squat the bar up. The position where the bar breaks off the ground, where they take the weight on, they're in a different position, but they'll initiate in a deep squat. Now, what that does, people will say it doesn't do anything, and that's not true at all. As you start to come out into the squat, those muscles are starting to contract, so you're getting a jump start on your rate of force development. Basically, you're getting those muscle fibers contracting, so you're closer to maximum force production by the time you take the bar off the ground. So there's definitely some momentum there. There's definitely an advantage there to people that time it right. Olympic lifters are a good example. Mikhail Koklayev, because they're so used to squatting down at the start of their cleans. He deadlifted 900 pounds in that style, kind of taking the bar for a ride on the way up. Eddie Hall's another guy that used to squat way down and then come up and take the bar with him. So that's more of an advanced technique. I don't recommend anybody implement that as a beginner or even as an intermediate. That's something that really, really advanced guys do when they figure everything else out. You're trying to make your deadlift as clean and efficient as possible, have as many pitfalls as you potentially can. So that's an unnecessary point of complexity. It's not guaranteed you're going to get anything out of it, but it requires a bunch of extra steps. So I don't recommend sitting way, way down. I recommend finding the spot where the bar breaks, where you are the strongest. If you can do that, it makes drilling all of your reps that much easier. You're going to be much more consistent. You're going to have a lot more success as a deadlifter. Number 6 is ripping or yanking the deadlift at the start. Now, this is just like the previous point where there is a case for advanced lifters doing it, maybe being a little bit better for it. But again, there's elements of complexity that work against just about everybody else. If you get your hinge pattern good, if you get comfortable doing a basic pull that starts at the same position, that has few moving parts, and if you can build strength with that over time, eventually you're going to feel where you can play into your strengths, where you can incorporate some of this other stuff. But generally, it just complicates things. You're not likely to get anything out of it. For a grip and rip style deadlift to work, or for a strapped in, just like aggressive yanked deadlift to work, where you're just ripping it off the ground, you have to have your midsection, your spinal erectors, your back, they just have to be made out of steel. Your legs, the horsepower from your hips, from your knees, have to be the limiting factor. And because your back can take the forces of you yanking into the bar like that, you're trying to get a little bit more leg drive by just grabbing and using stretch reflex to just slam the weight off the ground. That applies to a very select few number of people. And again, it is very inconsistent as a pulling style, so I don't recommend people do that. Get comfortable finding your strongest spot, having your cues that get your feet set, get your hands set, get your weight distributed in the sweet spot. And I recommend people practice pulling evenly off the ground. That means start to take the bar out in kind of a slow, even fashion, and know exactly when you're giving 100%. And by the time you're giving 100%, you're in the pocket, you're in a perfect position, and you're having no problems off the ground. That is going to make it so that you never whiff on a deadlift. You will be automatic. You'll be like a machine every single time. Now, number 7, this is one of the most valuable things I learned. Thankfully, I learned early on, and this does apply to absolutely everybody. That is pulling up on the bar at lockout rather than pushing your hips forward. Those are two distinctly different cues. Everybody thinks once the bar starts grinding up, they did the hard part, they got the bar going off the ground, it's coming to a crawl, it's scraping across your shins, it's getting to your knees, it's slowing down. You're just thinking up, 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 up. Anybody who's ever been to a powerlifting meet has heard the dozens of people in the audience yell, hip! That cue is meant to remind you to push your hips forward. Imagine, if somebody's bent over and my palms, that's where your hip is. Imagine somebody is coming behind and just kicking their boot right in your ass and snapping you upright. All that force should be directing your hips into the bar. Pecker to the pad. It's what we used to say in football, to focus on getting your hips out into the pad. It's the exact same movement. You can think of it like doing a glute bridge, except you're standing. You can think of it like a kettlebell swing where you're like snapping into this plank position. It doesn't matter what it is. Some people will say squeeze the glutes. Most people don't know what that means. You're under a shit ton of weight. It feels like everything's squeezing. Push the butt into the bar. Once the bar is over your knees, the lift should be absolutely over. There's no reason to get stalled. And there's people that will miss a lift 95% of the way up when they are in the absolute strongest mechanical position of the entire lift. The only reason you get these guys that can pull 750, 850 and miss 2 inches from lockout is because they got used to pulling in a shit position. They got used to letting their shoulders dump. They got used to giving up all the slack and just focusing on getting the weight off the ground. And as long as they got it off the ground fast enough, the rest was easy. So it's kind of a parlor trick to be able to generate all this deadlift strength and get so physically developed without developing the glutes. But if you're not used to finishing your lockouts as strong as possible, if you're not aware that you should be in this kind of compact, efficient position by the time the bar's at your knees so that you can ram your hips forward into the bar, then that is dysfunction that carries over into every bit of progress you make in the deadlift. And it takes, I'm not kidding, hundreds of pounds off your pull, because you can be as strong as you want off the floor. If you're weak at lockout, that is always going to be something that just leaves so much weight on the bar. It's not even funny. Weak lockouts are definitely a byproduct of shitty starting positions. They're definitely a byproduct of people getting into really contorted, awful positions that just take away all of their purchase on the lift as the bar crawls closer to the knee. But no matter what position you're in, once the bar is over the knees, shove your ass forward. That sucker will lock out, and it will lock out fast. Finally, number 8, and this is a pet peeve of mine because I compete in deadlift for reps very often. Most of my contests are for reps, and that is going limp in between reps. So if you are trying to build a very strong deadlift, even just for a 1 rep max, a lot of your work is going to be reps. Now, some people will instinctively deadlift the weight, lower it. Some people will outright drop it, which I generally don't recommend. Work the eccentric a little bit will benefit you in the long run. But when they lower the bar to the ground, they'll go completely limp. Sometimes they'll repump their hips, sometimes they won't, and then they'll yank back into the bar, having lost all of their stretch reflex. Now, squatting, deadlifting, benching is all a little bit different. Squatting and benching, you go through the eccentric first, so you get to use stretch reflex on the way up. Squatting, they let you exploit that in powerlifting by allowing you to bounce, where you have to lose a little stretch reflex in benching when you pause. That takes something away from you. But no matter what, you are going to get more volume with more weight when you're doing your reps with some amount of stretch reflex. Now, that doesn't mean you want to touch and go everything. It's an okay accessory to general deadlift work, but you do want to get in the habit of doing your work from a dead stop, even if you're not a strongman competitor, because you're training for that break off the ground. Every deadlift you ever do is going to start with that first hardest rep, so you want to get good at it. So if you want to optimize both of those things, so you're going to stand up at the top, you're going to get everything set, back braced, midsection braced, you are going to go down the way you came up, under control. The bar is going to hit the ground. You're going to maintain position, do a 1 count, and then stand back up. There is no better way to do reps efficiently. It means you don't have to lose all that stretch reflex on each rep as you drop the weight and you go limp. You don't have to hit with this huge surge of power as you're trying to find the handle and get that next rep going. Coming down the way you came up, it stores stretch reflex, it hangs out for a few seconds, but you're still going from a dead stop. So you're getting the practice of getting that position and then driving right back into the next rep. It is absolutely the best of both worlds. And as far as a skill developer, as a technical developer, it is going to ensure that you're in the same exact position every single time. This technique is how I beat guys who deadlift 150 pounds more than me in deadlifts for reps. I've pulled 605 for 10. There's 800-pound pullers that can't do that. And that would show in contests where I would edge them out because my technique was better. I was a little more efficient. And as someone who struggled with setup because of my build, that was a way that I reinforced my technique so it was as consistent as possible. Now, there are some advanced guys that do that. Really explosive lifters are going to want to rely on that big hip pump that they're used to get the bar started. But I still maintain that my technique is more efficient. So I strongly recommend you incorporate that into your training. That's all I got for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Leave your questions and comments in the comment box. Have you used these tips before? Did these address any problems you're having? Let us know what's worked for you in the past. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.